Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I won't take too much time, but I do want to introduce Rush Doshi before he starts. This session is on idea development and product canvas, and I don't think there's anyone that does that better. Rush has not only done this successfully for himself in multiple startups, but he is very much sought after by large companies who um, want to foster accelerators and want to first identify innovative ideas that might work, and then put them through the idea development product canvas process. Um, so I won't delay too much further. I'll introduce it to Rush, but again, feel free. This is an interactive session. It's more of a workshop than it is, just a straight presentation. I know Rush has some activities here, but this one's going to be a really good one. I welcome everyone. And at this point, I'm going to sit back and let Rush take over.
Hey, thanks, John, and good afternoon, early evening, everybody. I'm Rush Doshi, and I thank you for the intro, John. I want to just quickly introduce myself. As John mentioned, I've been in the startup world for over 20 years, mostly in the mid to late 90s, working in the Web 1.0 era of building consumer internet companies and then from there, starting a few of my own, learning a lot from both the successes and the failures of those ventures. And as John mentioned, over the last 6 or 7 years, I've been working more with larger companies such as Citibank and MetLife and Travelers on building out their innovation programs, starting new ventures, and leveraging a lot of the principles that startups normally use to 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 take those ideas and put them through the ringer. And so, what I hope to go through today are some techniques that you can use as you are in the early stages of your startup ideas. And as John mentioned, I want to make this as interactive as possible. So feel free to use the chat area to ask questions. And what I'll do is intermittently pause and take those questions. And, ideally, you can even ask them if you do it via video or voice as opposed to what you're typing in. So, that I just wanted to also go over, a quick some of the things that we'll be covering in today's session and workshop, talking about the startup mindset, going over some fun ideation techniques in case you're still in the early stages of even your idea or what it is. And then really just going through some tools and frameworks that I found to be really useful, not just for myself, but for a lot of the teams that I work with. These are just really great for you to use and to put your ideas through to both feel confident in them yourself, but provide and get confidence and traction by doing these things. And then we'll do some Q&A towards the end. But again, I want to sprinkle in the Q&A throughout. So feel free to put your questions in or comments or thoughts, and we'll make sure to address them. So before we get started, uh, I, as when you're thinking about a startup, first I want to congratulate you all on taking this journey and starting something. It's always this is perhaps one of the more exciting stages, but they're all exciting in their own different ways. But this is a really exciting one because there's so many dreams that you have, so many big ideas and thinking that you have, and this is the time to think big and to really um, think through all the different parts of your idea. This is the ideation phase. And what you're really looking for at this phase is some strong signals to validate that there's something there, that this idea has some traction, it can possibly gain momentum, it can solve a customer's problem, and you have a solution that fits that. So once you get past this stage, the other stages are you get to determining whether or not there's a problem solution fit. If you find that materializes, The next stage is you're going to figure out whether there's a product market fit, whether or not the thing that you are working on, uh, once it hits the market, can scale. And then the holy grail and what you're really looking for, because you all want to be unicorns at some point, is whether or not this can go 10x, and truly scale. And so this early stage, I think, is critical. It's fun, it's exciting, but you also have to, that there's some techniques you can use to make sure that you successfully make it to the next ones, and that you're heading in the right direction. So Steve Blank, in case some of you may know Steve Blank, but Steve Blank is somewhat considered the godfather of the lean startup movement in some ways. He's a professor at Berkeley. He teaches and has written many books on entrepreneurship and innovation. And the way he describes a startup is that it's basically a temporary organization. It's designed to find a reputable and scalable business model, right? And it's something interesting because when I was doing my startups, I never really, at least my first couple of startups, I never thought about it this way, but it makes a lot of sense to me now, where the startup really is an experiment, and it's a mindset shift in some ways. In that, sometimes we always think of ourselves in the early days as entrepreneurs, but I find a lot of the work that I've been doing recently and feel like works is when you put on the hat of someone who might be more working in a lab, a scientist. Where in these early days, what you're really looking for is strong signals to see whether or not this is an idea worth pursuing. And to do that, you have to do a lot of work to validate that idea. And so you're always looking for, well, what are the biggest risks to these ideas, and how am I going to go about de-risking it? And that's a big part of what you're really trying to do during these early stages. Um, and during these early stages, the other thing to keep in mind is that it's not linear. It's gonna be messy, and you're gonna have to iterate a lot. It's not. There's no one size fits all way of going about it. But as long as you keep an open mind and you remember that you're gonna hit, many things are gonna come, and you're gonna have to react to them, you'll be able to navigate this phase pretty well. I think the main questions that you want to make sure to ask yourself during this stage are around these three areas. One, and this is the way I would suggest looking at your idea throughout, is the desirability lens, the feasibility lens, and the viability lens. Desirability is all around, is there a need for this? Is there an unmet need? And how do I know this? How do I feel certain about this? Feasibility is around, can we do it? Maybe it's from a technical standpoint, maybe it's legislation that's out there. It could be a variety of different things that make it feasible for you to actually be able to do what you imagine is your solution and your startup idea. And then the viability side is it worth it? And that comes down to the economics of the idea. Is there a business model that can scale, that helps you in terms of being able to actually generate revenue and make it profitable, and so that's viable? And I would say in the early stages, a lot of the startups and company and founders I've worked with, if I ever talk to them about the things that they tend to focus a lot on the feasibility side. That's the part that they tend to get very excited about, especially if they're a tech company, because that's what they're doing. They're building, right? So they know, and they try to figure out, well, here are the assumptions I have around the feasibility. But I would say that quite more often than not, the riskiest assumptions that you'll have around your idea are on the desirability and viability side. And you really need to make sure that those are solid and strong before proceeding. Because if you're not able to make sure that there is an actual need and demand for this service, or that there's a way to make it a business, even if you can build it and even if it's feasible, it's not going to really matter, right? So quite often, I think that you may and we'll go through this exercise and I'll describe it later around an assumption mapper. When you're putting all your assumptions down, especially if it's a tech related solution, you're going to focus a lot on the feasibility. But if you find a way to look at the risk level, you're going to find that a lot of the things that you're most unsure about are around the market need and around the business model, which we can go into more. The key ingredients at this stage for your ideas typically tend to be around these three elements. Who is the customer or the person, the segment that you are targeting? What is the problem that you're trying to solve for them? And how are you going to solve it, right? And so these are things you may already have in place around your idea. But the thing to keep in mind as you're going through this journey is that a lot of it is going to change, and you're going to need to be prepared for that. You have initial hypotheses around all of these, but you might need to do the learnings and information that comes. You may need to pivot around the customer, or you may need to pivot around the problem or the solution. Ideally, you don't need to do all three at once, but you're going to find that it's okay to get the information as it comes and make adjustments based on that. And that's really what the agile approach and the lean approach to starting a new venture are all about, which is your ability to adapt to information that you're receiving. I'll pause quickly there to see, before I go to the next section, to see if anyone has any thoughts or quick questions around this. Anyone? No?
Rush, I have one.
Yeah.
Particularly on this, and I take the point, and I want to emphasize it too, that success is that iteration spiral, right? It's not a straight line up or a straight line down. It's not a spiral. How in this very early stage, when you're identifying the problem and the solution and the feasibility, I thought the point two was the feasibility. It's like, look, let's identify the problem first. How do you know to pivot? Or look, I just got it wrong. I'm just going to end this thing entirely, versus a pivot to say, okay, maybe I didn't get the problem exactly right, or maybe I didn't get the customer exactly right. I'm going to try another iteration. How many times do you do that in the process? And just in your experience, um, what comes out as the final idea? How often does it look like the original, kind of the original assumption? Just kind of your observation too on that.
Yeah, great questions, John. Rarely have I seen the end result, be around what originally was conceived, around original ideas. And you just look at a lot of the startups that are out there that have evolved over time. Some that come to mind initially, things like Twitter or Twitch. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with Twitch or anything, but a lot of these services started out with a certain hypothesis that they had, and they reached a dead end with what they were originally building, right? Like Twitter was originally around video games, I believe, and then they made a pivot based on some data that they were receiving around what in that solution that people were using were they more gravitating towards, and it was that 140 characters conversation out component of it, and the rest of it was useless. And they just made that shift over to just focus on that and then scale that part out. As far as how many of those you go through, I mean, it depends. There's so many things that depend on that, right? Like sometimes it could be whether, like from a problem standpoint, it could be that there's a hair on fire problem. Like this problem is not going away, but maybe what we originally had as how to solve for it was not the right solution. But this is still a big problem. So let's continue to iterate on that. Or, we then get to the solution and for the problem, but the segment that we're going after is not the right customer. So we can still continue to evolve on that. But a lot of that has to do with the founding team, ingredients like that, your capital, where you are in your life, like what your vision is and what you want the startup to be. Is it something, where in 3 years you're looking for it to grow to be, I don't know, like a lifestyle business that you can live off of, or is it something bigger? Have you already taken outside capital? So I think the financing plays a component to it as well as the runway and the appetite of the team itself to continue pursuing it. I don't really know if there's like one surefire answer to that as to how many iterations, but I would say that sometimes if there is like if you're reaching a dead end on the problem, where you've just uh, you've invalidated that problem, you've got to ask yourself whether or not you still want to continue to pursue it, right? Because it is a pretty big shift to go in these other directions, depending on the how much how much runway that you really have to do that.
So I got one more follow-up question, then I
Yeah.
promise I'll shut up. In your experience, how understanding or forgiving are the capital funders as you're going through these iterations, both privately and when you're working within a large corporation? How, do they understand that this is the process you go through, or is it one of those things where, as the entrepreneur, you do as much selling, um, potentially for the investors or the company or the team as you do, internally as you do externally, in that this is the process and you understand it, but those folks really don't understand that this is the iterative process.
Yeah. I have my experience with larger companies. Let's start there. Is theoretically they understand this process, so they've read about it, they've heard about it, they know that this is the process, and that it's not you're not going to hit a bullseye immediately and instantly, and it could take 3 years for you to really see some significant traction. But the patience wears thin pretty quickly. And so quite often, as an entrepreneur, your job is not just to go back and share your learnings, because learnings are nice and all good, but you have to do a sell job, and you have to continue to remind them of the end in mind and the big vision, and why you're doing it. And that's the case for venture capital funding as well. And I think that one of the things that venture capitalists and investors are always looking for is traction, which is like one thing that I mentioned is are you making traction? Are you making progress? We gave you this much money. What are you going to do with this money? What is this money going to do in terms of you making progress on this venture and this idea? So if you can go back to investors and be able to show traction, whether or not that you've gone a certain way and you've tested a unit economics model for a product or a service, or you've gone after a certain segment, you've tested out customer acquisition costs for something, and you said, I think we're going to get to this, and you invalidated it, and you took a methodical approach. Some investors, and a lot of investors I've met, are very keen on that, because they believe in the team, they still believe in the idea, and they believe in what you've done. But you still got to, in anything you do, you still have to you still got to lead with the vision, and get people excited about it. And it can't just be the scientist hat that I just said, but where a startup is an experiment. It can't just be an experiment, and that's where the founder comes in and their vision really, really comes out and shines.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, I promise I'll shut.
No. Keep them coming. So let me see if I can go to the next thing. So just some things around ideation, and some, maybe this can be more about inspiration and stuff, but like sometimes people, you're wondering about your idea and you're asking yourself, is this a good idea or a bad idea? And this Venn diagram here comes from Peter Thiel, who I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with, but he's a former PayPal guy and early on investor in Facebook. He's written a lot of books. He's a very famous venture capitalist. But his whole thing is, when you're looking at an idea, if the idea was obviously good, someone else would already have done it. So most successful founders tend to work on ideas that are, very few people besides them realize are good. Um, and while this can make you insane at times, if you keep at it, you will see results, right? And like an example of that is this one here, right? Like, anyone have a sense of what this could possibly be? Like, what is this idea, just based on this visual? You want to make a guess?
Make a guess. Fill in the chat.
I can't. That's right. Well, Jen, you are correct. That is right. That is Airbnb, right? And if you look at it, um, Brian Chesky, the founder, has a great thing for everyone to think about, right? Like early on, big ideas sound really stupid in the beginning, and then, if your idea is any good, there's no problem with sharing it because people will dismiss it, and that happens. A while back, I remember I was working at a place called Meetup, and I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with Meetup, but Meetup, the whole idea behind that was getting people to meet with other strangers in real life. And this was, right after 9/11 and like State Lab NBC and a lot of fear that people had in the world around meeting with strangers. So what a crazy idea to think that you can organize and just show up and meet at a cafe with a bunch of people that you don't know, and that will succeed and become a scalable model. So whenever they went out to tell people about it, people were like, that's cute, but no way, that's just not going to work. And over time, prove them wrong, and scale to, I don't remember now, 40,000 groups and 25 million members later, and an exit to WeWork. Even WeWork was kind of a crazy idea in some ways, and it ended, whatever their story ended. But those kinds of ideas are there, and sometimes you'll go to VCs and they'll just tell you, no, I don't get your idea. I remember in the early days, I don't know if you guys remember this service called Pandora. It's a music service, right? And in the early days, I met with the founder, and he told me his story of getting Pandora off the ground. He went to 200 venture capitalists to pitch the idea, and all of them said no, except the 201st, right? Knocked on that door, and that person gave him the check, and the rest is history in terms of where Pandora ended up and how it scaled, and the concept, right? So I think that sometimes you have to, there's a lot that goes into an idea, and I would say that the biggest ideas and the boldest ideas are the ones that sound crazy early on. Another thing to think about when you think about ideas, right, and this comes from an icon, Steve Jobs, is that a lot of, when you think of ideas, it doesn't have to necessarily be something new. It can be a lot that comes from connecting the dots and just your experiences. Like, you should trust your instincts and your gut quite often. You know a lot, you've been through a lot, you've lived, you've seen a lot, and that should contribute to what your idea. And but then once you get that, the thing is you can still leverage some of these techniques to make sure that the idea is going to work. But as far as where the idea comes from and what the inspiration behind it is, it's a lot of connecting dots, and that's like pattern recognition. So I'll give you a couple examples, and this happens in Hollywood quite often. But movies in Hollywood are not always new, right? So let's like, I'll do a little trivia here, or some fun here. So this is a movie, 9 to 5, a movie about working. And if you if you combine that with a movie like The Hangover, what do you think you get in terms of the script? Any ideas? Put in the chat stream. What movie do you think that this turns into if you combine 9 to 5 with The Hangover?
I don't know, but I really want to find out.
Any guesses? Well, you get Horrible Bosses, right? You get a movie that combines both elements. I don't know if you've seen that, but it became pretty successful where it also had horrible bosses too. So, you make a franchise out of taking ingredients from a couple of things that worked. Let's do another one, right? You got James Bond 007, and then you've got the Naked Gun. Combine those two together, what do you get? Any guesses?
We got it there. I think Austin Powers.
That's right.
Is that right?
That is right.
Yeah.
Ding, ding, ding. Yeah, exactly. Right. So a lot of this is pattern recognition, taking a little bit of both, being like, oh yeah, what if we did a movie around, this spy, and then he's just a, kind of like not serious. We could get something fun here. So let's do that, here, like eBay and hotels. What do you get? The eBay marketplace model and hotels. Any guesses?
So we have a Zillow.
Yeah.
We have Expedia. We have, oh yeah.
Well,
Airbnb. Yeah, that makes sense.
We get Airbnb, right? So let's go a little further. What if you take Airbnb and we apply it to cars? What does that become? John, you would know this one.
I know that one, but I'll let people guess. We have a Turo. We have an Uber.
Very good, very good. Turo is correct.
Yeah.
And if you did that, you took the Airbnb for, clothes, expensive nightwear. What do you get? That's right, Elena. Jen, you get Rent the Runway, right?
The Runway.
So sometimes, quite often, sometimes it's connecting the dots to take some ingredients from models that work to give you higher confidence in some of the ideas that you're thinking, right? Particularly around how would you structure it, and how would you take some of those best practices into your ideas? Any questions on that?
No, but I will release some Airbnb. You mentioned that was a wild idea at the time, right? And I remember, reading that those folks really had a tough time getting funding or an accelerator to back them. And I read it in their book. I think it's true that, their back was against the wall. They had no money, and it was the 2008 election, and they repackaged Cheerios and Captain Crunch and renamed them Obama O's and Captain McCain, and got enough money to survive the next month. But it was that resourcefulness that attracted the original accelerator that accepted them, because these guys just aren't going to die, right? We just, as from what I hear, that's actually the truth, which is, a revolutionary idea like that. I really take that to heart. It's like, look, if we're on the fringe of a good idea, somebody would have done it. It's that bad idea that really is good, that other folks don't recognize as good, that keeps the thing rolling.
Absolutely, and they kept at it, and there was a bit of a timing, right? And they took advantage of a moment, an event in time, where in Denver there were no hotel rooms available for the 100,000 plus people that were there to see that Democratic National Convention speech. So, and yeah, but absolutely. At the time, it didn't seem like I remember that too, because couch surfing was like this organization, this nonprofit kind of guy being like, hey, I just go across the country and around the world, I couch surf. I'm just going to stay at your couch. Yeah. Like, what? Really? Is this going to take off? And is this really a threat to hotels? But now look at it. Look at where Airbnb now is, and look where Marriott and the Hilton are. And so it's really like the market cap and the growth and where Airbnb is going is pretty phenomenal.
No, absolutely. Same thing with Uber. If somebody had said 20 years ago, you're going to get into particularly in New York, right? You're going to get in a stranger's car and they're going to drive you, someone you've never met before, and they're going to drive you where you need to go. And then, you would have thought that was lunacy, right?
Absolutely, and I think that some of the things that they used were best practices from other spaces, right? In terms of reviews and reputation scores to help you feel more confident when you're going into a drive that this person has a 5.0 out of 5.0. That helps you, right? Like this wisdom of the crowds in many ways in those reviews help alleviate some of the concerns you may have going into a stranger's car in a lot of ways. So yeah, I'm just gonna go into the lean canvas, which I wanted, in case you are not familiar with, I wanted to mention to everyone here is I actually think this is perhaps if there's anything you get out of this session, this is the one for you to take away because I find this to be the most useful tool when evaluating your ideas. And I use it a lot myself, not just with the teams I work with, but I have ideas too sometimes, and I put it through the lean canvas to see, if this is gonna, what really is this idea? Where are the holes in it? So, but before going to lean canvas, the whole idea around this is you've got to, it's this is easy to say, but hard to practice, and I'm guilty of it myself a lot too, because quite often we have a tendency to fall in love with the solution, and so you sometimes start with the solution um, instead of you know knowing whether or not there's a door there. So the takeaway here is like focus on the door or the problems that are worth solving. Don't start with the solution, and you'll probably hear this a lot in the circuit around, you should fall in love with the problem and not the solution, which is 100% true. But I got to say that it's very hard to practice. The thing that keeps a lot of people going and gets people excited waking up every day is the potential of your solution. It's just the thing you get excited about. You're like, oh my God, you're in the shower and you're thinking about it. But you got to take a step back and remind yourself to be as objective as you possibly can around that and think about, around the problem itself, right? And the thing to always keep in mind is you have to be objective. The person that, while you have to play many roles as a founder, including being the biggest cheerleader of sorts and the biggest salesperson, is you also have to be able to take a step back and be honest with yourself around whether or not, you have confirmation biases or you're taking the learnings or data that you're getting in or the feedback you're getting in from customers and you're just don't want to believe it. And so and that's you can fall into that trap. So I think it's very important for you to again think, sometimes have two sides to the way you look at your ideas and your startups, where you're both an evangelist but you're also that lab scientist of sorts, and you got to make sure that you're able to stay grounded with both of that. And this is just a great quote from Einstein, I think, where a lot of your time, at least right now, at this stage of your startup, should be spent on the problem, making sure that it actually exists and that it's worth solving. So the lean startup, which is the lean and the lean canvas, actually is a great tool, which I'll get into. But the way that it works is you start with the lean canvas. It helps identify what your risk case assumptions are, and that helps guide what you're going to do and what you're going to test, right? In the olden days, we spent a lot of time, and I remember my first startups, I would spend most of my time putting together these business plans that were 50 pages long, had 5-year forecasts, tons of material and information. Most of it were just assumptions. I don't know. You don't know that whether or not that's actually true or not. And what the lean canvas does is take a lot of that and condense it into this one pager that I feel is the best thing about this is that it simplifies it to the core essence of your idea. And so this is the lean canvas, and the lean canvas is just broken up into boxes, right? And I'm not going to go through all of these right now, We could share this afterwards, but the thing to think about over here is, um, you know, the numbers associated here are the ways in which you should go through this canvas. You start with the problem, and you get into, what are the top three problems or pain points that your customer has, and how are they currently solving it. I think it's important for you to make sure you're aware of that. What are they doing? What and that helps identify what your key competitors are, as for solving this problem. And then the second box you go into are your customers. Who is your target customer? And then even within that target customer segment, it's important to think through, who do you think the early adopters are going to be for this product, right? Then you go down the road and go into unique value proposition. What is it? Okay, then you finally get to solution. If you know, solution's not one of the first things. It's a bit later, right? Because you really need to nail down the problem and the customer first. And it sounds easy, but when you actually put this, you fill this out, you may take a little bit of time to be like, I don't know, is that true? Is that the customer? Wait, is this the problem? Are these the biggest problems? And as you go through this, you'll continue to iterate on it, and it'll become clearer and clearer through the information that you're gathering. And so it just goes into all the key elements of your idea, including, what are the channels you're going to use to reach your customer? Marketing is key, right? Like, what are distribution channels? How are you going to get to them? How are they going to know about your product or your service offering? What's the cost structure? What are your revenue streams? How are you going to measure success? And what, if anything, are your unfair advantages? So filling this out will give you almost a 360 view of your idea at this stage. And the thing to keep in mind as you're filling something like this out is, don't spend too much time on it. Just fill it out with what you know right now and what you think is the truth. Because what you're doing as you go through this exercise is you're identifying your assumptions. Because at this stage, for many of your ideas, they're likely to be assumptions. You don't know for sure whether that's true, but you have a hunch that this is true. And that's okay. It doesn't have to be known. Through this, you can then go in and oh, good. Somebody has a question, right? Wait, somebody does have a question, right? Gabrielle has a question.
Oh yeah, I had a question.
Yeah.
Not to take like what you're saying like too literally, but I guess some people kind of get like, I don't know. I just wanted to like clarify. So when you were saying like, oh yeah, usually like the ideas that like most people kind of like dismiss at first and stuff like can have like the most potential, like should you be like worried if like some like a good amount of people are like saying that you have like a good idea? Like of course you're gonna have people who like disagree with you, but like is it more saying like, oh, like any idea has like a possibility of being like a really influential business? I guess if you understand my question.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say that if you're going out there and you're getting strong signals that people think your idea is a good idea, that doesn't mean it's not going to succeed. I think that Venn diagram was not meant to say that if everyone's thinking it's a good idea, well, why aren't people doing it? That's okay. I don't think that would eliminate that idea if that's what you're asking. And the same is true if everyone thinks it's a bad idea. Well, who knows? Like the thing is, you can go out there and test it. There are a variety of ways that you can do low cost ways to test whether or not this is actually a viable idea, right? And so getting feedback from people depends on how you get it. So I think that one of the things we have to keep in mind is like, if somebody's saying it's a good idea, well, it depends on like how you're presenting it to them, right? And I think that's very important too, which is there going to be confirmation bias potentially. And even if they think it's a good idea, the other thing to determine is, okay, if they think it's a good idea, what are they willing to do for it? Are they willing to pay for it, or are they willing to sign up for it, or whatever it is, like whatever the service is, you've got to get some strong signals in addition to that. So I'm not sure if that helps answer your question, Gabrielle.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Sure. I don't want to harp on Facebook as an example, but here's, Facebook, if you fill this out and you use Facebook as the example for it, Facebook, what's interesting about them is they've got both a customer and a user, right? Facebook's customer are their advertisers. They're the ones who are paying Facebook. That's how they generate revenue. But Facebook's users in that model are all of us, the 3 billion or whatever they're up to, 4 billion users around the world. If they don't have the users, then they can't get the customers, right? So there's a dependency there in this model. But generally, when Facebook was first starting out, you can think and look at what the problems were that they were seeing, which is like back in those days, social networks were not with people that you were really friends with. At that time, it was mostly just MySpace, like emojis, and just all kinds of stuff back then. I don't really want to go too much into it, but this is what they thought of as a problem. And then their segments, one thing I'd mention here is that the early adopters for Facebook were, hey, you know what? We're all at Harvard right now, so we're going to test it out at Harvard. Like that's what they decided to do, right? Like let's just limit it to this group of people because we're there. And that was the reason why they decided to make it, to focus there on those schools. And once they validated some of their critical assumptions, they scaled it out, and everything else has happened since then. But I think when you're filling something like this out, one thing to keep in mind as you're filling out a lean canvas is, you don't want to make it into a thesis or anything, or you have you have a lot of information and you're putting everything that you know or think about, because that defeats the purpose. The whole idea behind this is to be able to synthesize your idea clearly and concisely into these from all these different angles. And if you can't do that, you should just keep going at it. Like, what's the core essence? Because this will also help you with things. So wait, someone has a question from Ebony. Is a lengthy business plan still necessary? Well, John, I'll let you also chime in on that. But, I would say that no, it's really not. I think that a lot of the due diligence that you do when you're putting a business plan together is still really important and critical. And I think that when you're going out there and let's say you're going out there to raise money, you are going to be asked a lot of questions around those things. So I think that many elements of a business plan you still probably should do. But I don't think you should do that until you've actually validated. You could validate some of your idea with actual data very quickly and very early on before really getting into all the elements of the financials, for example, around your business, because again, a lot of the financials around your business at this stage, if you don't have any strong signals or data, would just be guessing anyway. So you might as well first go in and dive really deep into the problem and the customer needs, and before you get into the unit economics and fleshing all that out.
Yeah, I think that's the one thing that's maybe changed in the last 20 years or 25 years. I think that's right. I mean, I think you should have thought all this out, but not necessarily in a formal business plan. But 25 years ago, I think that investors and funders, they just expected to see that. I'm not sure they ever read them completely, but they expected to see it. And now, Bruce, I don't think they expect. I don't think the attention span is that long. I think if you can't put it in a short deck and a a one pager or a two pager, you just never get to
That's
to the
right.
next phase.
That's right. They just don't will not pay. They will not look at it. They'll move on. They get pitched so many ideas, and they're like you said, John. Their attention span is so short. They're just like, boom, I get it. Even one slide sometimes is all they need to be like, wow, I see it. Let's go. Let's talk. And then they dive deeper into it. So the lean canvas, the idea is like to describe your idea on one page. As you're going through this program, if you are in this program and cohort, or as you proceed with your startup, keep reviewing it, revisit it based on your learnings and update it, and continue to track the validation of your key assumptions that you're making here, because I'm telling you, this will change, and having a one page place to look at it is a great way to keep it top of mind, as opposed to hidden or stuck somewhere else, right? And that's why this kind of tool, I think, is pretty useful. I don't know if we have time right now, and if you guys wanted to do it, but I thought that this would be a good exercise for you, if you guys are up for it, to just take a stab, at some of this. Maybe you may want to, if you guys want to take 5 minutes, and then we can do a quick share out for some of you who wanted to share what the problem is that you're looking to solve and who your customer is. Why don't we take 5 minutes for you guys to take a stab at it? You could just write it, on your or type it wherever you want, and then we'll just you could just share it out via voice.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Entirely voluntary, but take a stab at this, jot some notes down, and let's review.
Yeah.
So can I ask you a question
yeah.
while people are doing this?
Yeah.
So you mentioned needing to validate your idea with experiments. How do you avoid tipping off potential competitors when you're doing this? Like, how did Facebook do that when they were doing their early experiments? How were they sure no one else was going to, take their idea?
Well, that's like a question. That's a great question, and sometimes, and I've had it sometimes as a founder myself, where I'm a bit guarded with my idea and putting it out there. But I really don't think that's as much of a risk at the stages that you're at with the idea, particularly. I mean, a couple ways you could do it is you could limit it. You could limit your experiment to a certain group, right? So that it's not widely available or public and invisible to people. You can I think that the limitation is a way to do it. And with Facebook, what Facebook was doing originally was that they were limiting it originally just to one school, which was their university. It was in Mark Zuckerberg's dorm room among his friends first, spread it out, and did it just at that place. Then it got some traction, and then spread it out. But by the point that it got some traction and some validation, for someone else to come in and replicate what they were doing was going to be, already you're a bit further ahead. So I rarely, at this stage ever worry too much about competition. The other thing I use sometimes is that if it's like with a company, and when I've worked with larger companies like Citi or MetLife, sometimes they don't want their name associated with it, or they don't want anyone to know that they're looking into this. So it's not branded that way, or it's very limited and controlled. It's invite only sometimes to get in. So to even get into a private beta or a test or see a prototype is permission based. So there's a lot of ways you can limit it. You can also at times ask for people to complete and fill out some sort of disclaimer, making sure that they won't but this is confidential.
Okay, thanks.
But I don't really worry about that. I would not worry about those things right now, to be honest.
Okay.
You know, unless you really think it's extremely proprietary. Like Brian Chesky said, you know, with the Airbnb example, you know, if it's a big idea, just tell everyone. You know, it's one thing to have an idea, but to really execute and move on it is another thing. So I just don't think that you're going to run into the issues where someone's going to drop everything they're doing and saying, oh, we got to go out and execute on this. They may think it's cool, but your job is to continuously, they won't know what your learnings are, right? And they won't know what the results are. Only you will, because you're the one doing the testing and the experiments. And you're going to be able to take those and apply them as you move forward.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I mean, I have to jump in. And early on, the attorney in me used to worry about that a lot. And I can honestly say it was an overblown issue. Usually, at least in my experience, as Rush says, most folks, even if this is in front of them, won't act on it. And by the time they act on it, you're so further ahead, relatively speaking. I mean, the flip side of addressing a problem that a lot of people don't see or don't see your way is that they'll dismiss it up until the point that it's dominant. At that point, you've got a head start, right? So yeah, I used to worry about that a lot, and then I found that a lot of that worry was just it was in my head, right? It really wasn't real.
Okay.
Yeah, Bruce, you're absolutely right. I mean, I can tell you that I worked in consumer internet early stages. I worked at places like called Bolt, which was the first social network for teenagers in the 90s, and then Black Planet in 2001, and before MySpace. And so I saw Facebook happening, and they were not the first. They just learned from a lot of our mistakes. I mean, there was a lot of things that we were not doing that they did very well. And I would think the thing that they really did that we did not do at the time was they created, like the Lean Canvas said, that the connections between people on these other social networks were not real. These were not real connections, and they were not networks. And what Facebook realized is that there's a value in the network effect of creating a social network around people you actually know in real life, and you're actually expressing who you really are in your real identity. It's really interesting. I don't want to go into it to dive further into this, but now we're going back into a world of anonymity again after decades or now of everyone doing everything in real life through social networks. You're getting into avatars again, and those are becoming the thing. And you'll see NFTs take over, and that's like the hope in a lot of ways, where people are just going to go back into an icon and the metaverse, maybe, which, by the way, the Brooklyn Nets are the first basketball team to go into the metaverse, in case anyone is, I don't know. We'll see how it goes. All right, anyone want to do a share out?
I do.
Great.
Okay, so my problems are employees are feeling more burnt out than ever. Employees are expecting maximum work for minimum benefits, and there are not enough mental wellness resources for employees to de-stress from their jobs. The customer segment, the customer are actually the companies, but the user are the employees. In my target market, so I have two components for my business, a software versus a physical retreat. For the physical retreat, I'm targeting like startups and smaller companies, probably with about 200 or less employees. For the software, I'm actually targeting medium to large size companies. And my early adopters, I feel like would be like well-funded startups.
That's great. That's great.
Thank you.
There you go. You know, that's something to start off with. What you said there is those were quite specific, and you can go out there and start validating some of that, like the pain level of pain that these folks are feeling and these companies might be. And then the flip side, your assumptions in some ways around your target segment and your early adopters, and just going out there and start running a couple of tests to see whether or not these assumptions are correct. Anyone else want to do a share out?
I can do one.
Sure.
Okay, I have a medical device that treats sinusitis using ultrasound. So the problem, three simple problems. Sinusitis treatments are not very effective, or they're really invasive. Sinusitis or sinus infections makes you feel really rotten, and there's actually studies to show that it really takes a toll on your life and your energy level. And a lot of the people who suffer chronic sinus problems, they're trying everything. And when you talk to them, you find out that they literally have tried everything and they're still not getting relief. And they're also suffering from the side effects of the things that they're trying. So the solve for today is what they're currently using is symptom relief products. They're using decongestants, intranasal decongestants, but those just address the symptoms. They do not actually address the core of the problem, which is inflammation in the sinus. They use antibiotics, but the CDC estimates that for every 15 prescriptions that are written for antibiotics, only one person gets better, and that's because the bacteria in the sinuses live in a biofilm, and the blood doesn't necessarily make it into that biofilm. So the biofilm is protecting that bacteria. So antibiotics are just not very effective. They're also using saline irrigation, which means that you're actually snorting water through your nasal passages and into your sinuses and back out again. Kind of the joke is that it's a little bit like feeling like waterboarding. People are doing it, but it's not a pleasant experience. And the data suggests that maybe it helps shorten things by about a third of a day. Or they're doing surgery and balloon sinuplasty, which is really, really invasive. The customer segments that we would be going to are consumers, doctors, drugstores, club stores, and mass. And our early adopters, we'd be looking for the patients that have really tried everything and are willing to be open to trying an ultrasound technology to try and improve their sinusitis. We'd be targeting ENTs that have previously adopted new technology quickly. So who were the first in balloon sinuplasty, who were the first to try drug-inducing stents. And then from an online standpoint, or for the drugstores, club stores, and mass, we'd be targeting obviously an online presence to create proof of principle for the retailers as to why they would want to take this into their stores.
That's great, Cassandra. I think the existing alternatives that are out there, you're able to highlight many of the reasons why they're less than ideal. And great job also on identifying some of the early adopters, of course, with the segments and the problem as well. That's great. Yeah, so just fill these out, and feel free to share them with John or myself later, and we can review them and help you for sure. But I'd like to go to the next thing here that I think might be helpful to some of you, is this idea around the job to be done. This is a fun concept. So this is an interesting one, and this is one that especially if you have built products in the past, has become far more of a way in which you think about building out your product. And it's really about reframing how you think about it, away from features over into outcomes. And it's something that was championed by this professor at Harvard, Clayton Christensen. He wrote many books, including a very popular one, The Innovator's Dilemma and Crossing the Chasm, which were two really big popular books back in the day. Maybe I'll send a link to all the things I reference here, so you guys have that afterwards. But the whole idea behind jobs to be done theory is that it orients you towards the need and the problem that the consumer is looking to solve. And I think that this is a great quote from Clayton Christensen, where he mentions that, you know, a lot of this work that you want to do at this stage is almost ethnographic. You know, you really want to get into the feel and understand this person, and as much as possible walk in their shoes, and keep probing and learning, you know, to understand why. And you know, to bring this to life, I thought you know, one of the ideas and examples that he brings up a lot that I wanted to share with you is an idea around milkshakes. So I'm not sure how many of you have ever had a McDonald's milkshake or enjoy them. They're pretty tasty, but Clayton, you know, his team was hired by McDonald's because McDonald's had, you know, had seen that the sales of milkshakes were pretty flat. So they did what any classic fast food company would do. They identified their target milkshake demographic and sent researchers to analyze the audience's milkshake preferences. You know, unfortunately, once they started making new evidence-based and better milkshake based on the research, the sales didn't improve, right? And they were trying to, you know, they went back to, that's why they went to Christensen and his team and be like, you know, hey, can you help us here? And so what he did was he went and had his team go over and, you know, just park themselves at a McDonald's. And what they did was, you know, they went there to try to do the job that the customers were hiring the milkshake to do. So they spent days at the chain's restaurants documenting who was buying the milkshakes, when they bought them, and whether they drank them. And what they discovered was that half the milkshakes were purchased before 8 in the morning, and they were purchased by men. And the men were mostly alone. And it was the only thing they bought, right, on their way to work. So, you know, what they learned from all this, to keep it a long story short, was the job to be done was that they had a long and boring drive to work, and they just needed something to do while they drove to keep the commute interesting, right? And that was a job that they were looking for someone to, you know, they were looking to determine who to hire to fill that job. And like this quote, you know, paraphrasing the customers, like they needed something like 20 minutes to suck it up through a thin little straw. You didn't really care what was in it, right? All they knew is that they needed company and they needed the commute to be interesting, right? So here's a question for you. If you know, who do you think the milkshake was competing against? If that was the job, right? If the job was to have a long, boring commute and I need something to give me company that, you know, that will take me a little bit of time to consume. Any ideas and thoughts on what some of the potential competitors would be to the milkshake? Coffee, yeah, that's a good one. Tea, I would pick tea. Donuts, indeed, that's right, Jen. Music, ice cream. These are good ones. Yeah, so, you know, through their research, you guys hit it right. You're absolutely right. You know, some of the main things that they were competing against, the milkshake is competing against a donut, a banana, coffee, a Snickers bar. But here are some of the things that, you know, made these less than ideal, right? A donut, you can finish it pretty fast and it may make some crumbs, right? A banana, again, you're done like in 3 minutes. So you've got 20, 25-minute commute, not going to do the job. The coffee is great, but it only tastes good when it's hot. And the Snickers, there's a little bit of guilt of eating a candy bar in the morning, right? So, you know, what they realized was that what they needed to do was they needed to make the milkshake thicker, and they needed to add more spice it up a little bit by adding more chunks of flavors and all kinds of things. Because again, people didn't care what was in it. They just wanted it to last. So when they did that, the sales went up sevenfold based on that insight, right? And I think that the takeaway here is just, quite often, the job to be done is not necessarily what someone is trying to sell you, right? The manufacturer is selling you a 1/4-inch drill, but that's not what the customer wants. The customer wants a 1/4-inch hole. And so if your only thing is a drill, there's many other ways that you can possibly get the hole in there. So you have to keep that in mind. I think that another takeaway from this exercise is not just drilling in, but also understanding what the value proposition is to your customer and how to position your product to them, right? And quite often when somebody's hiring you to do a job, it can run the gamut. They can be hiring you for a functional need, meaning I want the best espresso, I want it to be consistent, or it can be an emotional need, which is, I have this Nespresso in my house. It makes me feel good, but it makes me look good in front of other people. So it could be a bit more of a vanity play for certain people, depending on what you're doing, right? So, I think that the key takeaways to take away from this framework are to focus on the job that the customer is hiring you for, and to do that, it requires really going in and understanding what the customer is going through and probing, right? It's also important to recognize that your competitors are not who you might think they are. Sometimes, quite often, I hear this all the time when I worked at helping startups in fintech, for example. They'd always have this new software idea, but they're competing against Excel. Like that is like the biggest competitor to most of these products is an Excel. People are using Excel to do a lot of this work, right? Or they're using email. But we have to consider that when we're thinking about our consideration set of our competitors. And as it the thing about the drill, and what the needs are, the customer is rarely buying what the company thinks it's selling to them. And that's also an important thing to keep in mind as you're building out your idea. I'll pause there. And so this is a template to use, which I'll share, but something to think about is, when in a certain situation, the customer may want, what is the motivation or forces they have so that they can get an outcome. And it can be when I'm driving to work, I want to find a long-lasting breakfast food so I can stay entertained while driving and still arrive looking smart, right? That could be what the job is the primary job you're looking to solve for. I'll pause there to see if anyone has any questions on that. That makes sense? Yeah, no. Well, I'll continue on to sort of an extension of jobs to be done around forces. And this is another thing for you to think about as you're thinking about your idea is another, the unmet need and the solution. You have to, again, put yourself in the mindset of the customer, right? And look at the forces. This is called the 4 forces kind of look at the mindset of the customer, which is what are the things that are going to push them towards your idea, your startup? And what are the things in red that are going to keep them using the thing that they're currently using to solve for that, right? And the push and the pull are, the push is the thing that I'm using right now is really bad. It sucks. It does not solve, I just can't take it anymore. And the pull is, wow, this thing looks really good. And then on the flip side, the things that are keeping them towards sticking with what they have is inertia, which is, I'm kind of used to it. I don't really want to change. The switching costs are pretty high. Or anxieties, which is, I don't really know this startup. I don't know you. I don't trust you, right? That can be a big part in terms of getting someone to adopt your product or service. And these are the things you kind of have to keep in mind, and to keep it a bit simple, you want to make sure that the push plus pull is greater than the red. So get the green to be greater than the red, and you're gonna start getting some traction, because but how you get there, of course, takes some time. So this is Jim McKelvey. He's a glass blower, and he was an owner of a glass factory that made glass faucets. He participated in our fair, but missed the opportunity to sell one of his glass sculptures because he couldn't accept credit cards, right? So he lost $2,000. And this is basically how Square started, right? Square started because there was this glassblower owner, and when you're out and about and you're at a fair, you're at an outdoor event, and you want to sell something, people don't have cash. They don't have checks. They only have a credit card, and you're like, sorry, I don't accept it. If you don't accept a credit card, you lose business. So that was what started, the discovery, looking into, well, what's going on over here, and the guys who started Square started looking into what are some of the challenges that these kinds of micro businesses face. Processing fees are high, point of sale systems are expensive, non-registered merchants, and registering is a difficult process. So all this stuff helped, figure out what it was. And so then that was like where the guy started thinking about, the Square Reader. And just to put this into context, this was in 2009, right? When the iPhone had just launched. So, this was the early days of like, well, what was going to work? But the guys they had an idea, and they had technologists who were, working on something that could work, where you could put something into the audio jack, in an encrypted card, which I'm sure you guys still see to this day, sometimes as a backup. When you go out to an event, people still sometimes have that as a backup to accept credit cards for Square. But that was really, the initial idea and concept behind Square. And, originally the initial target audience for them were these micro merchants, street vendors, pop-up stores, taxis even, to accept credit cards sometimes because they were mostly cash driven. And they were looking for people who were making less than $250,000. And they were hearing again and again that cash only merchants were struggling because people were moving more and more towards credit cards and plastic as a way. The adoption continued for credit cards, and it was only a matter of time before digital was going to happen. And so there's 5 to 7 years down the road where this was going to be. They also looked at what the frequency of the need was, and so they built this out. And I know we're running short on time, but I just wanted to quickly show, like, this was an example of the forces that they dealt with at the time, that they had to overcome. They had some push and some pull, but they also had some areas that they had to work on, which is, some people were like, hey, especially the merchants, like, what, cash, check, that works fine for me. I don't have the time to switch. I'm a small business owner. I don't have the time to do this. And the other part is, hey, I don't know this, and this is new to me. The iPhone is new. And now on top of that, you're going to make me put this little thing in here to accept credit cards? Whoa. So all that was like, new at the time. And so there was a lot that these guys had to work on and overcome significant risks around it. But we can go into the story a little bit later, but I know we're almost out of time. So long story short, Square started with that market of people who were just needing to sell at an art fair or at a farmer's market. And they started with micro merchants, and then they expanded their market segments into small businesses and to where they are right now, which is, and along the journey, there's many things that they had to do to get the credibility to overcome some of these fears, including a big partnership with Starbucks to become the POC system, POS system for them. But anyway, any questions on that? Or I feel like I just inundated you with a lot there. So realize.
Rich, I did an observation. I just want your opinion on this because I did read this from the Airbnb guys. They said in initiating an idea, concentrate on satisfying a customer 110%. Um, you know, getting a zealous advocate as opposed to satisfying a myriad of customers at 50%, right? Zero in on that person that really at the beginning becomes, and if you can't do that, that gives you some feedback. But if you can, then you can judge the size of the market and everything else, as opposed to, shooting it out everywhere. Concentrate in on that person that really needs that solution so badly that that they become an advocate for you. It's appropriate this section too with the um, with what those guys did. What's your feeling on that?
110%. That's true, right? And in a lot of ways, if you look at the lean canvas, one of the things that's missing in there is the TAM, total addressable market size, and customer base, right? A lot of the focus early on are on zooming in on the segments and then early adopters, because you really need to make sure that there's someone who is really strongly believes in this and is willing to pay for it, and you've identified who that is, right? If you can identify at least that, then you've got something to start exploring and expanding upon. But if the first thing you do, and this happens a lot, I see with startups, especially when they're doing total market size, they start with this top-down approach, which is like, hey, Forrester estimates $20 billion market, and then drilling in to make this big number. But that doesn't really matter, especially at this stage. At this stage, it's much more important to have identified some group of people, and it could be small, and it should be small early on, that you have introduced this product to or service, and that they are strong advocates for early on. 110%. That's like the approach that I recommend to all startups. I know that we only have about 10 minutes left, so I did want to leave some time for some questions. I'll just quickly go through, another movie reference here, but quite often the traditional method of startups, and I've done this, I'm guilty of it myself, is like, if you build it, they will come. You just come in, you have this great idea, you put everything into it, you build it, you launch it, you see how it goes. Boom, gonna get there. But that's just not just gonna happen, right? And we now have modern day techniques that can prevent us from going down that route, and doing some things in the interim to help de-risk some of these things, right? And this is from Peter Drucker, who's a professor, a pretty well-known professor of management at who is absolutely correct. Don't do it if you don't have to. And this technique is prototyping, right? And the reason why it's called prototyping and not prototyping, cute, is that you're pretending quite often, right? And I just wanted, and I'm not sure if you guys know about Zappos. This is an example I just wanted to give to you in terms of what you can think about applying it to what your idea. But Zappos, at the time, was a really crazy idea, which is that why would anyone buy shoes online without even trying it, right? And so, Zappos was dealing with, this was in 1999. So they had an idea of selling shoes, but they had two critical assumptions that they need to make sure were true. Otherwise, they wouldn't really have a business, right? One is that people would actually buy the shoes online. And the second is that they can guarantee that you can return it, a satisfaction guarantee, and that even by offering that, it would still be a viable business for them, right? In terms of business model. So what they went about doing was they did something which, some people call Wizard of Oz or different things, where people think that there is this full-fledged website that's fully functioning, but in the back, everything is being done manually, right? And so Zappos, what they did was they would go out there and take photos of shoes, built a website with all the shoes. And when somebody would order it, they'd go to the local shoe store and pick it up from there, right? Manually go to the store, buy the shoes, and then mail it out to them and see the results. Me as a user, I'm not aware of any of this. I'm clicking on the button and thinking this is all being done automatically, right? So I think that some of the things that you want to do early on are think of creative ways in which you can test your concept without spending too much money or wasting too much time in doing so, right? Because you've got to get back to what exactly is it that I need to learn. And I think that what these guys did is they zoomed in on the things that if they were not true, this business was not going to succeed. And that's all they focused on. They didn't focus on building this full out website, the logistics of it all, and trying to take on Amazon, right? They focused on this. And once they felt like I validated that these two are true, then they started being like, oh, there's something here. Okay, well, let's continue to pursue this, and what's next. So I think that that's very important in these early stages of your ideas, is to think of quick and dirty ways to get the some feedback around your idea. And then this is the agile loop, which is you build, you measure, you learn. And we don't have too much time, but there's a lot of different ways in which you can prototype. You can do things like they did, which is fakes, or hacks. You can do pop-ups where you have like, an event or a place someplace, and you do a one-time thing, and you just test to see how it does over there at a location, even a physical location, if you wanted to do. And lastly, I think the most important thing that you need to do, and I'm always amazed when I talk to a lot of founders about this, is you need to talk to real people and real customers. And I think that that's a really scary thing for founders and startups, right? Like just going out there and talking to people about your idea, there's a lot of discomfort. There's discomfort about how to even approach it. There's discomfort around, well, what are they going to say? What if they don't like it? Like there's fear of that. And I think that you have to feel comfortable going out there and soliciting the feedback on your idea, but also using that as a customer discovery opportunity to learn more about your customer and their lives and what they're going through, so that you can feel more confident that what you're doing has a higher chance of success. And we don't have time, but there's all these techniques that you can use when you're doing customer interviewing. And I think that this is critical. Again, going out there and doing interviews, one of the things you got to make sure is you got to make sure that how you're doing it is not going to result in false positives or false negatives, for that matter. Meaning that you're not going to get signals suggesting that this thing is really great, or on the other hand, you're not getting signals saying that, well, no, this thing's just not going to work, right? You and how you structure this and how you talk about it, and sort of that there's all kinds of tips and techniques on that, which maybe you might be covering, John, in future weeks. But interviewing is.
Yeah, I mean, this is great. I mean, unfortunately, we have a stop at 6, but yeah, I mean, if you would like to join us a little bit next week, or jump in at another time, that would be great. Because if there's more to this, this is really good. I enjoyed it. I hope everyone else did. And there's a lot of good information here. So I thank everyone for attending. Rush, I thank you, and I do invite you in for a little bit of next week to move into MVP with us in Troy, if that's possible. No, no obligation. But yeah, thank you a lot. This has had a lot of good information, and I don't want to cut you short. I wish we could go over, because I mean, I hope everyone's enjoying it as well as I can. But there's a lot of good stuff here for idea. I mean, especially too where it's changed from kind of the standard practice even a few years ago, right? We're getting into some juicy part too, because the Zappos thing, I knew it. And Mark Lohr with Jet was the same thing. He started with diapers.com, and they did nothing more sophisticated than buy diapers off the rack at Walmart and sell them online just to make sure there was a market there. So this is good stuff. Any closing remarks or questions? I think we've got like 1 minute now.
No, I'm sorry I wasn't able to get through all of it and get to the assumption tracker, which was sort of an extension of the lean canvas. It's just another tool that there's two tools I would just lead with: lean canvas and assumption tracker. That is all you need, because that will help guide your business model and your business idea at this stage. And I just want to end with saying, have a lot of fun, and think big. This is the time to think big. I mean, every time is the time to think big, but just be fearless. And
Excellent.
it was great. It was great meeting you and talking to all of you. I hope this was helpful. And yeah, good luck.
Thank you. Thank you.